Welcome back to another quiet night beneath the falling snow. Last time, Santa shared stories about the wonder and warmth hidden in winter nights. Tonight, he's back again with new tales, softer and a little closer to the heart. So wherever you are, in a warm room or wrapped in your favorite blanket, let your thoughts drift with the snow outside. Let's return to that small cabin in the woods where the fire's still burning and Santa is waiting.
The snow had quieted outside. Santa sat by the fire, his red coat faintly dusted with frost. He took a slow sip of cocoa, and the flames reflected in his eyes. "There's something I've always wondered," he murmured, voice soft and thoughtful. "Why do we celebrate Christmas on December 25th? Why choose the coldest night of the year to speak of warmth and light? Long before Christmas was ever Christmas, the world had only winter. The nights stretched endlessly, the sun grew weaker, and people began to fear that light itself might never return. So they built fires, they sang into the darkness, and in every corner of the world, from the Romans to the Norse to the Celts, hearts waited for one moment, the day the sun would return. They called it Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. It was when the world stopped tilting away, when shadows hesitated, and daylight slowly began to grow again. Many years later, when early Christians searched for a date to honor a different kind of light, the birth of hope itself, they looked to that same turning point of the year. They chose the day the light returned. "December 25th, Santa whispered as the firelight danced across his gloves. Not because it was the true birthday of the child they cherished, but because it was when the world had always learned to hope again. Since then, through centuries of snow and silence, humans have gathered candles, strung lights, and whispered to each other that the dark won't last. Because deep down, they've always known light isn't born from the sky, it's born from within us. The fire crackled softly. Santa leaned back, eyes half closed, a quiet smile curving beneath his beard. "It's funny," he whispered, "we never really chose December 25th. We only chose to believe that light would return." Outside, snow drifted gently past the window, glowing gold in the firelight. "And maybe," he added, "each heart has its own December 25th, the moment it begins to shine again." The piano faded, the room dimmed, and Santa's voice softened to a hush. "Good night, the light is coming back." The fire was still glowing from before, its light flickering softly against the window pane. Santa leaned forward, resting his gloved hands on his knees. "You know," he said with a chuckle, "people always leave out milk and cookies, but they forget the story of these." He pointed to the stockings hanging over the fire, each one slightly different, yet all waiting for something. "Do you know," he whispered, "why we hang stockings by the fireplace? The story begins long, long ago, before chimneys, before Christmas trees, before sleigh bells even had their first ring. There lived a kind man, once wealthy, now poor. His wife had passed away, leaving him with 3 daughters, each one gentle, bright, and full of dreams. But as the years went by, the man's money faded like footprints in snow. He feared he could no longer help his daughters marry or live comfortably. So he grew quiet. The laughter that used to fill the house became whispers and sighs. Now far away, word of his sadness reached a traveler, a man with a beard as white as snow and a heart that never forgot kindness. The traveler had no gold to spare, or so people thought. But he did have something better, a way to give hope without being seen. One winter's night, when the stars were sharp and the air carried the scent of pine, he visited their home. The fire had burned low, just enough to cast a faint light across 3 stockings hung to dry by the hearth. The traveler smiled, reached into his bag, and quietly slipped 3 small bags of gold inside, one for each daughter. When the family awoke, they found the stockings heavy and shining with warmth. The man wept with joy. His daughters laughed for the first time in months. They used the gold not for riches, but for beginnings, a new home, a brighter future, a promise that kindness still found its way even through the coldest nights. Word of the miracle spread quietly. People began to hang stockings, just in case kindness passed by again. And somewhere along the way they forgot the traveler's name, but remembered what he left behind. Santa looked at the fire again, his eyes reflecting its glow. "Some say it was St. Nicholas," he murmured. "Others say it was just a man who couldn't stand to see sadness." Then, almost to himself, he added with a faint smile, "I like to believe it was both." The stockings swayed gently in the rising warmth of the fire. Santa stood brushing the ash from his coat and whispered, "Maybe that's what giving really means, leaving warmth where no one expected it." The wind outside sighed through the trees, carrying the faintest scent of pine. "Rest now," he said softly, "and may your dreams be full of small kindnesses left quietly behind." The flames dimmed. The room glowed golden. Another night of stories melted into sleep. The room had fallen quiet again. The stockings now hung full, their shadows long and soft across the floor. Santa took a slow sip of cocoa, his eyes drifting toward the window where the snow whispered against the glass. "You know," he said with a playful twinkle, "people often ask me one thing, and it always makes me smile." He leaned closer, lowering his voice like a secret shared only in the glow of candlelight. "Why?" he asked. "Do I always come through the chimney? Long, long ago, there was no chimney, no sleigh, no reindeer. There was only a man who loved to give. But the world was not always ready to receive. In the old days, many people were cautious. Doors were locked tight against the thieves, and kindness was sometimes mistaken for trickery. So this man, Saint Nicholas, they called him, had to find other ways to reach those who needed him most. One winter's night, while wandering through a quiet village, Nicholas passed by a tiny cottage. Inside, he heard children coughing softly and a mother praying for warmth to last till morning. The door was bolted, the windows sealed against the frost. But above the roof, a thin line of smoke curled into the sky, the only open path left between their world and his. Nicholas smiled. If no door welcomes me, he thought, then I shall come by where warmth already lives. And so, with his bag of gifts slung over his shoulder, he climbed to the roof, knelt by the chimney, and gently lowered a bundle of wood and food through the opening. The next morning, the children woke to find the fire still glowing, the scent of bread filling the room. The mother wept with joy, believing an angel had visited. But Nicholas, far away, simply smiled and whispered to himself, "The chimney carries warmth. It should carry kindness, too." From that night on, wherever he traveled, he used the chimney, not because it was easy, but because it was the only place where warmth waited for him. And over the centuries, as homes changed and fires became memories, the chimney stayed a symbol that even in the coldest nights, kindness will always find its way through warmth and smoke. Santa looked at the flickering fire and laughed softly. "You see, I never wanted to break into homes," he said, his eyes gleaming. "I just wanted to bring warmth where warmth already lived." The flames crackled, throwing gentle sparks that danced like stars. Santa leaned back, pulling his hat a little lower. "It's funny," he said quietly, "how we enter people's lives not through doors, but through small, open spaces they leave behind." Outside, snow began to fall again, silent and slow. "Rest now," he murmured, "and may your heart always leave room for a little warmth to find its way in." The room dimmed once more. The fire whispered one last sigh. And somewhere far above the clouds, laughter echoed softly, fading into the quiet hum of winter sleep. The embers were dying now, soft and dim like the last heartbeat of the night. A faint hum of wind brushed against the window pane, carrying the scent of pine and distant bells. Santa tilted his head back, watching the glow fade. "Funny thing," he said, a half-smile curling beneath his beard. "People see me in red and think it's just a color for Christmas. But red has followed me far longer than Christmas itself. There was a time when I wore no color at all, only wool and winter, the shade of smoke and snow. I walked through villages wrapped in gray, my coat rough, my hands bare, my gifts humble. No one looked twice. I was just another traveler, passing through the cold. There was a time when I wore no color at all, only wool and winter, the shade of smoke and snow. I walked through villages wrapped in gray, my coat rough, my hands bare, my gifts humble. No one looked twice. I was just another traveler passing through the cold. One night I met a girl standing alone by a frozen stream. She couldn't have been more than 10. Her dress was torn, her shoes gone. But in her hands she held a red scarf, bright as flame against the white of winter. "It's for my brother," she told me, her breath turning to clouds. "He's sick. He says red keeps him warm, even when the fire goes out." I knelt beside her, the snow crunching beneath my boots. "And does it?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Only if I believe it does." That night I followed her home, a shack barely standing, lit by a single candle. Her brother lay under thin blankets, his face pale but peaceful. The scarf lay over his chest, a small flicker of color in a room made of shadows. I left quietly, but I couldn't shake that image. A red thread of hope burning in the coldest place I'd ever seen. The next morning I returned with food, wood, and a new blanket, red like the scarf. But when I opened the door, the candle was gone. The boy had passed in the night. The girl was asleep beside him, clutching the scarf like it could still carry warmth. I knelt again and covered them both with the red blanket. And for the first time I prayed that color, that light, would never fade. From that day I wore red, not because it was bright or festive, but because it reminded me that even in sorrow there can be warmth, and in memory there can be love. So when you see me wrapped in crimson beneath the falling snow, remember, it's not just the color of Christmas, it's the color of a promise I made long ago, to never let the warmth die out. Santa's voice trailed into the hum of the wind, the room glowing faintly from the fire's last breath. "We all wear something that reminds us who we were," he murmured. "For me, it's red." Outside, the snow fell slower now, softer, almost tender. "Sleep well," he said, rising from his chair. "And if you dream of red, may it be the kind that keeps you warm." The fire sighed one last time, and in that hush between snowflakes, you could almost hear a heartbeat, steady, gentle, like warmth remembering where it came from. The fire crackled softly, and for a while Santa said nothing. The room was quiet, only the hush of snow pressing gently against the window. Then he chuckled, the sound deep and warm, like the memory of bells in another time. "You've probably heard it since you were little," he said, "that I fly through the skies with a team of reindeer. But have you ever wondered why they fly at all?" He leaned back, eyes reflecting the faint glow of the embers. It wasn't magic that made them fly, not at first. It was something else entirely. Long before the sleigh, before the jingling harnesses and ribbons of light, there was a single reindeer, a quiet one, named Ari. Ari wasn't like the others. While the herd grazed and slept beneath the northern lights, she would lift her head and stare at the stars for hours. "You'll freeze out here," the others would say, but Ari would only whisper, "I'm not cold, I'm listening." I met her one night when the snow was too deep for my boots, and the path ahead had disappeared under white silence. My lantern had gone out, my hands were numb, and I couldn't tell sky from ground anymore. And then I heard a sound, the soft rhythm of hooves, careful and patient. A faint glow shimmered in the storm, and out of the white stepped a reindeer, with fur like moonlight and eyes like melted amber. She stopped beside me and bowed her head like she'd been expecting me all along. I remember saying, half to myself, "You must have lost your herd." She blinked slowly, snow catching on her lashes, and I could have sworn she smiled. "No," I heard in my mind. "You did." I climbed onto her back, not out of choice, but trust. And when her hooves touched the ground again, they didn't sink. They glided. One step, then another, and the earth fell away. The storm opened like a curtain, revealing the quiet vastness of the sky. We weren't flying because of magic. We were flying because, in that moment, she believed we could. She carried me home through clouds and cold. Lifinder, her breath, painting trails of frost that shimmered behind us like ribbons of light. And when I looked down, I saw the world glowing below, villages sleeping, chimneys whispering warmth. I realized then, sometimes, belief itself is magic. When we landed, I tried to thank her, but she simply lowered her head, pressed her nose to my glove, and walked back into the snow. The next year, I returned to that same mountain and found a whole herd waiting, antlers dusted with starlight, hooves glowing faintly against the ice. Auri stood among them, her eyes bright with a kind of warmth no fire could give. "Are you ready?" I asked. The wind answered for her, a quiet hum that lifted the snow around us, as if the sky itself was saying yes. That's how it began. Not a spell, not a trick, just faith, and the promise that belief can lift anything, even something as heavy as the winter sky. Santa smiled faintly, watching the snowflakes melt against the window. "They don't really fly for me," he said. "They fly with me." The fire sighed low, and the sound of wind filled the quiet room again. "And maybe," he added, his voice almost a whisper, "the reason they still soar every Christmas night is because someone down below still believes they can." The fire sighed low, and the sound of wind filled the quiet room again. "And maybe," he added, his voice almost a whisper, "the reason they still soar every Christmas night is because someone down below still believes they can." The flame flickered once, twice, then settled into a calm golden glow, as if nodding in agreement. The fire had grown quieter, its crackles turning to soft whispers. Snow tapped gently on the cabin window, like someone too shy to knock. Santa sat back, hands folded over his coat, the glow from the hearth painting his face in amber warmth. "Have you ever wondered," he began softly, "why bells ring on Christmas night?" He looked toward the wooden shelf across the room, where a single silver bell hung by a red ribbon. It shimmered faintly in the dim light. It started long before Christmas was a season of gifts and feasts, Santa continued. Back then, people lived in faraway villages, scattered among mountains and forests. Winters were harsh, so cold the rivers would freeze into silence. On stormy nights, no one could see their neighbors' homes through the snow. The only thing that could break that silence was the sound of a bell. Each ring, he said, wasn't meant for celebration. It was a signal, a way to say, "I'm here, I'm alive, you're not alone in the dark." In some places, families would hang bells by their doors. Whenever the wind howled too loudly, someone would step out and ring it. Once, twice, just to let the others know they were still there. And when another bell answered from the distance, it felt like a heartbeat echoing across the cold, steady, human warmth. Santa's eyes softened as he reached for the small bell by the fire. Over time, people began to forget the storms, he said. But they never forgot the sound. So the ringing became something else, a symbol, a reminder that no matter how long the night, someone, somewhere, still remembers you. He paused. The bell gleamed between his fingers. Then, with a small smile, he rang it just once. The note was clear, bright, and fragile. It lingered in the air longer than it should have, wrapping the room in a soft kind of magic. "You see," he whispered, "bells don't just mark celebration. They call to us to come home, to listen, to remember." Outside, the snow kept falling, slow, endless, and peaceful. And in the stillness, the faint echo of other bells began to rise, carried by the wind across the sleeping fields, answering him from far away. As the last note faded, Santa leaned back and closed his eyes, murmuring, "Some sounds never stop ringing, not in the air and not in our hearts." As the last note faded, Santa leaned back and closed his eyes, murmuring, "Some sounds never stop ringing, not in the air and not in our hearts." He chuckled quietly. "Funny," he murmured, "how something as simple as a sock became a symbol of hope." He settled deeper into his chair, the firelight painting slow gold patterns across the room. "You know," he continued, "there's a story behind that too, one that began long before anyone thought to call me Santa. Centuries ago," he said, "there was once a kind man who lived in a small town, a man who had once been rich, but whose fortune had vanished with the turning of years. He had 3 daughters, each bright and gentle, but they were poor, so poor they could barely afford food, much less the dowries needed for them to marry. Every evening, the girls would hang their washed stockings by the fireplace, hoping they'd dry by morning. Their father, tired and worried, would sit near the fire, staring into the flames, wondering what kind of future he could still give them. One night, a cold, moonless one, a traveler passed through the village. He heard whispers of the man's troubles. So quietly, under the cover of snow, the traveler dropped 3 small bags of gold down the chimney. When the man awoke the next morning, he found the gold nestled in the stockings by the hearth. And for the first time in years, laughter filled the little house again. Santa smiled, his voice low but warm. "Some say that traveler was St. Nicholas," he said softly. "Others say it was just a kind stranger who didn't want to be seen." But either way, that night became something more than generosity. It became tradition. Over time, children began hanging stockings too, not because they expected gold, but because it made them believe that someone, somewhere, still cared enough to fill them. It became a quiet ritual of faith, a way of saying, "I still believe in kindness." Santa leaned forward slightly, eyes reflecting the fire's gentle glow. "I filled many stockings in my time," he said with a grin, "but the truth is, the best gifts have never been the ones I leave inside." He gestured toward the fire. "They're the laughter that wakes the house before sunrise, the arms that wrap around you when you realize you're loved, the quiet gratitude that makes the room feel warmer than any flame." Outside, snow brushed softly against the window panes. Santa reached for one of the stockings, ran a gloved hand over its edge, and whispered, "It's funny how love hides itself, sometimes in a bell's chime, sometimes in an empty sock." He smiled faintly, eyes far away. "And maybe," he added, "that's why I still stop at every fireplace, just to make sure hope never forgets where it lives." The fire hummed, the bells were quiet, and the stockings swayed ever so slightly, as if remembering the night the first gift of kindness fell from the sky. As the last ember in the fireplace dimmed, Santa's gaze wandered to the corner of the room, where a pine tree stood, glowing softly with strings of light. The stockings behind him swayed gently in the draft, as if whispering to the tree. He smiled and said quietly, "Every home I visit has one of these, but not everyone knows why." Long before there were fairy lights and glass ornaments, before ribbons and tinsel and cameras capturing smiles, there was just a tree, tall, evergreen, silent, standing alone in a winter forest that had forgotten color. The story, Santa began, comes from a time when people feared the dark of winter, when days grew shorter and nights felt endless. They believed the trees that stayed green all year were touched by something eternal, something the cold couldn't kill. So, to keep that hope close, they brought a piece of the forest inside. They hung apples and nuts from its branches, symbols of the life they wished would return when spring came again. And around the flicker of candles, they whispered blessings, not to summon magic, but to remember it. Centuries passed, Santa continued, his voice slow and steady, and the world began to change. Castles turned to cottages, old gods turned to stories. But the trees remained. He paused, tracing a finger through the soft dust of snow on his glove. And one winter's night long ago, a man named Martin Luther walked through a forest under a sky so clear it seemed to breathe. The stars hung low, glimmering between branches of pines dusted with frost. He stopped, heart caught by the sight. 1,000 sparks of heaven tangled in the trees. And when he returned home, he placed a small pine in his house and lit candles upon its boughs, so his family could see the same wonder he had felt beneath that sky. That, Santa whispered, was the first Christmas tree that shone with starlight inside a home. Since then, the trees have changed their clothes, glass instead of apples, gold instead of frost, but their purpose has never faded. Because when you light a Christmas tree, you're not just decorating wood and branches. Send the Bielertschli and reminding yourself that warmth and wonder can still live in the heart of winter. Santa leaned back in his chair, eyes twinkling. "I suppose," he said softly, "it's a promise we keep with the world, that even when everything sleeps, something inside us still wants to shine." Outside, a cold wind hummed through the night, yet the room stayed warm, not because of the fire, but because of the glow that lived within the pine. Santa's voice grew quieter, almost a lullaby. And perhaps that's the true gift of the Christmas tree. It doesn't chase away the dark. It simply teaches us not to fear it. So when you turn off your lights tonight, and only your tree keeps glowing in the corner, remember that tiny shimmer of green once stood alone in the snow, carrying hope for everyone who believed light would return. As the soft glow of the Christmas tree faded behind him, Santa reached for a small package wrapped in crimson cloth, worn from countless journeys. He turned it over in his hands, a faint smile beneath his beard. "Every year people leave gifts beneath the tree," he said. "But once upon a time, it wasn't about the giving. It was about why we give. Long ago, before chimneys and sleigh bells, before letters written in glitter and dreams tied in ribbons, there was a desert, cold at night, endless by day. And across that desert walked 3 travelers following a star. They carried gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, not because they were asked, but because their hearts told them something extraordinary had arrived. Their journey was long, uncertain, and yet each step they took made their gifts mean more. They didn't bring wealth, Santa murmured, his eyes glinting with the light of memory. They brought meaning. Centuries later, people still gave, but the world had forgotten why. Wars were fought, kingdoms fell, and somewhere in all the noise, the simple truth of giving began to fade, until one winter night, a poor family shared what little they had with a stranger. A small loaf of bread, a blanket too thin to keep out the cold, and yet, when morning came, that stranger had vanished, leaving behind a small pouch of silver and a message carved into the wooden table. Kindness is never wasted. Until one winter night a poor family shared what little they had with a stranger, a small loaf of bread, a blanket too thin to keep out the cold. And yet, when morning came, that stranger had vanished, leaving behind a small pouch of silver and a message carved into the wooden table. Kindness is never wasted. Santa chuckled softly. I've seen every kind of gift there is, toys, letters, cookies, even songs. But the ones I remember most aren't wrapped at all. He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping to a gentle hush. like the man who repaired his neighbor's roof before the snow came, or the child who left half his candy by the window for someone who might be hungry tonight. He looked at the tiny package in his hands again, the one he had carried since the story began. You see, he said, the gift itself doesn't matter. What matters is the thought that someone, somewhere, paused, even for a moment, to think of another. He slowly unwrapped the cloth. Inside was nothing, only the faint smell of pine and cinnamon. And yet, as he held it open, the room seemed a little warmer. Perhaps, Santa whispered, that's all gifts were ever meant to do. Remind us that we're not alone in this cold world, that someone out there still believes we're worth the warmth. Outside, snow began to fall again, silent, steady, endless. Santa glanced toward the window, watching the flakes melt against the glass. And maybe, he said softly, that's why giving feels so good. Because somewhere deep down, every gift we give is really a way of saying, I see you. So tonight, when you leave a small box under the tree, or write a note for someone you love, don't worry about what's inside. The real magic has already been given. It's in the thought, the care, and the warmth that reached them before they even opened it. The snow outside had grown quieter now, as if even the wind had stopped to listen. Santa leaned back in his chair, eyes flickering toward the hearth. The gifts we give, he said softly, often begin with the smallest gestures, and sometimes those gestures start with nothing more than an empty sock. It began, as most good things do, with kindness. Many, many winters ago, before Santa's red coat, before sleigh bells, there lived a humble man in a tiny village. He was a widower, with 3 daughters, each with hearts bright as morning snow. But the family was poor, their home cold, and each night they fell asleep by the fire, hoping warmth would stretch just a little longer. Santa's eyes softened as he looked toward the flames. There was no magic then, he said quietly, only hope and the courage to believe that goodness might still find them. One evening, as the daughters hung their stockings by the fire to dry, a traveler passed their window, a man cloaked in frost and mystery. He saw their small home, the faint light of embers, and the weariness in their faces, and something stirred inside him. That night, when the house had gone still, the traveler reached into his satchel and dropped 3 small pouches of gold into the stockings, one for each daughter. In the morning, when sunlight kissed the frost on the window, the girls awoke to find their socks heavy with something that gleamed. Their laughter filled the room, breaking the quiet that poverty had built for years. They never learned his name, Santa said, smiling faintly, but kindness always leaves a trace. Word of that night spread like a soft wind through the villages. Soon children began hanging their stockings by the fire, not to dry them, but in hope that someone kind might pass their way too. And when people asked who the traveler was, the stories changed a little each time. Some said he was a nobleman, others said he was a saint. But the truth Santa's voice lowered, was that he was neither. He was just a man who couldn't bear to walk past need when he saw it. Years later, Santa said, looking into the fire, "I found myself walking the same roads, through the same villages. And I realized something. It's never really the gold or the toys that fill those stockings. It's the hope, the belief that someone, somewhere, still cares." He paused, the fire crackling softly, painting his face in amber light. "That's why the stockings stay by the hearth," he murmured. "Because warmth, real warmth, doesn't come from what's inside. It comes from knowing that someone wanted to make sure your night was a little brighter." Outside, the wind began to hum a familiar tune, faint, gentle, eternal. Santa stood, brushing the ash from his coat, his gaze lingering on the fire. "So if you ever hang a stocking," he whispered, "remember, you're not asking for something. You're inviting kindness in."
And that's how the night fades once more, with the sound of Santa's stories lingering in the firelight. Maybe some tales made you smile. Maybe some made you think a little longer before you sleep. Thank you for staying until the end, for sharing this quiet time together. The fire's almost out now, but there'll be more stories soon. Until then, stay warm, stay gentle, and let a bit of winter's calm follow you into your dreams.